ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Zombie Train. This is episode 267, and I'm your host, Ellis, otherwise known as Train Man. And this week we have a question about something that I've referenced a lot. I'm not sure I ever really got into it. This was back on episode 220, and we talked about ZT operations in that episode, which I would probably do me a favor to go back and remember what the heck I was talking about. There was a big boy in Denver and many other engines at the Denver Transportation Museum. I believe the big boy number was 4014. Did you use it much, and did you ever head to Denver? So, I've mentioned Denver before. I have. And I can talk about the fact that because Cheyenne was less populous, we ended up using that a lot, and had a better sort of outfit for steam locomotive restoration, much to Weibold's chagrin. But we did, Denver was very important in the later stages of World War Z. And by that I mean, once the Zombie Train Incorporated had sort of a decent grasp of what was going on, and we were able to help the military as much as we could, and as much as we did, we started doing work, moving a lot of troops as they came east. So they had the Rocky Mountain border for, a number of years. They had the Rocky Mountain border for, actually, a number of years is wrong. They had it for a number of months. I think it was over a year that they sort of stagnated there before they were ready to make a big push that went any farther. But they had the border, and we crossed that during, the saga that I've talked about in the past. And after that, we started helping them moving east. And so, as they came east, they would go for, places that were easier to grab, and then after that they would go for, the population centers. They would do a fairly good job of surrounding a population center by picking up a lot of the suburbs or a lot of the outlying communities that were easier to clear out and were, hosted fewer zombies. So, we, when we went for Denver, we really didn't have too many options. We had to go in through Denver. We had to go in through, the center of Denver to actually get very much done. But we also came down from the north, from Cheyenne, and took out, Boulder and Greeley and those sort of areas. And we started building this perimeter, which the perimeter was very marked by, a major highway except to the east, or except to the west, where there was not that highway, and that was the difficult portion to wrangle. Now, we had avoided Moffat Tunnel a lot because of the problems with Moffat Tunnel and getting steam locomotives through it without proper ventilation. It was the kind of thing where we, it was good. It was a good way through, but because we were doing a lot of work in Cheyenne, it was less of a great way through than it otherwise would have been. So, there were too many tunnels on the route, and it had fallen into a little bit of disrepair. But we were closing in from the north, and then we sort of swung around to the east, which was dangerous, because that's a very flat area. You're getting into almost Great Plains territory there, and I've talked about the dangers of the plains before. And thankfully we did not have that many issues with that, and then we also had another contingent, because we had plenty of people at this point, plenty of locomotives as well, come up from the south. The contingent from the south got stopped in Colorado Springs because of the population density there. It led to a lot of zombies, and we had really sort of avoided Colorado Springs because we didn't feel like there was a very good reason to go through there. But when they went through, they ended up getting stopped because of some track damage, which we didn't know about because we didn't go there very often. We didn't use the front range line that much. it was generally a lot of running east to west, which is unsurprising. And if something was up in Cheyenne, we generally wouldn't worry about something, anything south of Denver from there. Because that area is pretty arid, it's pretty empty, and we tried to stay away from it. So, that said, they had their issues at Colorado Springs, and that delayed that push on Denver. And so the rest of us are sitting there twiddling our thumbs. And I was part of this contingent from the north. I was in Boulder. Wild was somewhere to my east. And we had other people coming in on what was effectively a troop train from the east. Heading east from the west. Troop train from the west. And so they had set up a little camp outside of the entrance to Moffat Tunnel, the east portal of Moffat Tunnel. They had started to get some of the gear running, and that train came through, which it was done by a cab forward, I believe, or R1 cab forward, which we reserved for this operation in particular because of these issues. And so they came through, but they couldn't get past that, and so they got held up because of a number of tunnels and a number of cuts that had basically just suffered damage because of not being maintained, because of a lack of maintenance. So it was serendipitous that the southern people got held up because the western people got held up, and that was most of the troops right there. The issue was that the western people, because they had more people, were able to sort of push through much faster than the south people were. The east people were the west people were also only dealing with zombies. So the troops the troops were only dealing with infrastructure problems, which could be remedied with the supplies that they brought with them, because we knew that would happen. The south people were dealing with zombies, which are a little bit more troublesome, especially when you're in a environment where you're trying to sort of corral them all. We were trying to get them to come into Denver, so that we could then draw them out in one motion and actually bring them sort of towards Moffat Tunnel, where we were going to bottleneck them and, deal with them in that way. And that was actually, that was the strategy we inevitably went with. But the problem was that there was a big hole to the south. So we tried to draw all the zombies that way, and not all of them went that way. Some of them went south. And so while the majority of the troops were busy picking people off at, sort of near the entrance to Moffat Tunnel, there was another group which had sort of started wandering south and had not been corralled or noticed even, and then started causing more hell for these people around Colorado Springs, or just north of there. We tallied the numbers, and we sort of noticed the size of the hordes we were fighting, and we realized that something wasn't adding up. And then we finally got in contact with the guys down south, down in Colorado Springs, and realized that they not only were having trouble, but they were about to have more trouble. So, we ended up sending the people that were over on the east end of town, sort of near Aurora, because they had pushed in. They went through Denver, they went south, they, got in behind these guys, and this was not a group that had the amount of people or the firepower necessary to take out this many zombies. We had done the numbers and we tried to figure that out, but eventually it came down to a little bit of guesswork and a little bit of, well, we just hope they can make it, and they were valiant. They did an extremely good job. They did not lose anyone, and once the Colorado Springs guys got moving a little bit north, they ended up ping-ponging this group of zombies back and forth between them, where one group would make a lot of noise, and so the zombies would go towards them, and then when they were about to be overwhelmed, the other group would make a lot of noise and draw their attention off the other way. So, it was a strategy that we'd employed in the small scale, but it was something that had never been done on this size, and it went very well. And without that, we may not have been able to capture Denver so well. You know, with regard to all the issues that we had. If we still had the issues that we had, were it not for that strategy, we wouldn't have gotten Denver. Almost definitely not. There would have been too many zombies that went to the south. They would have definitely overwhelmed the guys in Colorado Springs, because again, that was not a lot of people. They did not have a lot of troops, and they really didn't have a lot of ammo, because they were just sort of the corral crew. Just like the rest of us, they were there to, you know, make sure that if zombies were wandering off in that direction, you get their attention, and then you sort of radio back to the main group, and they get their attention and bring them back west towards the tunnel. So, because that didn't happen, because we were not close enough, because we could not get their attention if it were not for the other group that got sent southward to help them, they would have had a much worse time, and they probably would have been overwhelmed and had to retreat. And then we would have had a group of zombies that was moving towards a relatively undefended area, and that could have been disastrous, because then you end up losing track. You end up losing track of them. And that's not something you want to happen. You always want to know where these hordes that you're fighting are, because once you start moving people into Denver, and then once you start moving most of the troops out to go to their next assignment, that's of course when they're going to show up again. And we learned our lesson, I think at a more northerly town. It must have been somewhere in Montana. But we did not have as many rail lines there to sort of perform this kind of maneuver. And yeah, so we ended up leaving one flank totally open. It was a relatively small town. If I'm glancing on the map here, I think it was like Gillette. Which, is that even in Montana, or is that's like in Wyoming? I'm looking at the map now. Yeah, it's in Wyoming. It was close to Montana. We performed a similar strategy on Billings as sort of a test, and then we went to Gillette and tried to do something similar, and a bunch of zombies ended up going up north, because that's not where we were, so they just wandered off in that direction, and then they ended up heading around to Billings again after we had moved people out. So, that was sort of the lesson we learned, where we could really only assault these major cities, which those aren't even major cities, really, size-wise, compared to Denver. We could really only assault these major cities with a lot of thought, a lot of manpower, and really good encircling of the town. And it almost worked. It almost worked very, very well for Denver, and some last-minute stuff allowed it to work. Just period. But that was Denver, and then we moved a lot of stuff into there, because Burnham Shops is very capable, it was very large, and the fact that it was kitted out for diesel, and as the war went on, we ended up, switching over to diesel towards the end of the war. Burnham Shops became an excellent place for a base of operations for diesel operations in just the general West. Excluding the West Coast, but anywhere from the Midwest to the Rocky Mountains, Burnham was the go-to. Denver was the go-to. And it really showed, because the area around it kind of exploded and was super fortified, as the war went on. And then those fortifications have sort of dropped away as we've moved past the war and they're not a threat anymore, but really that is the stronghold. If we ever have another event like World War Z and people have to fall back in Denver, the fallback point is going to be the area immediately around Burnham Shops, because it's incredibly well defended at this point in time. So, I hope that sort of answers the question. I know, it's not as interesting as it could have been with the way that, sort of the way that we ran trains, because we didn't really use them that much. We didn't really use Denver that much, early on, which is when things were, I think, really interesting and really kind of fun. As fun as war can be. But, yeah, it got its use, and getting Denver, that was really something else. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you next week. And we've still got another, 20 seconds, actually. So remember, if you have any more questions or you want me to elaborate on something, feel free to post a comment down below. I will put it in the list and I will get to it. We've got plenty of comments at this point, but I could always use more. So, I will see you next week. Trademan out.